Hey, there we go. Hey guys, so we're gonna be V-2's. There's so many of them. There's actually only 6, but still. So we're just gonna start this off. It's gonna take a while. The frame rate is going to be unimpressive. Oh god, just how unimpressive is it going to be? And that was our second, third second, and fourth second. Oh my god, we are really, this is a frame rate, okay? Oh god, so we have 5 V2s all stuck together. Scotch tape, I believe. Fuck duct tape. You can suck a nut. And so we're on our way. We're using some Tiny Tim boosters to get us off the launch pad because this thing is heavy. As you can see, they're stretched quite a lot compared to the normal V2s, and this one up here is also quite fat. But we sort of need it to be, otherwise we just don't have enough fuel to make it. And I'm going to, minor disclaimer, we're not actually going to be putting a V2 into orbit this time. We're trying, you know, we're going to give it our best shot. But I do kind of have to point out that we are not actually even attempting to get one of the V2s themselves into orbit. What we're actually going to do is using these 5 V2s down here as a booster stage. We're then going to be using this V2 as a sustainer stage to get us up there. And then the little thing that I have in here is going to get itself into orbit for the most part. Basically, I have one of my orbital maneuvering systems that I use on my satellite launches, and we're going to be using that to get itself into orbit, basically. And we're basically going to be using these V2s, as I said, as the early stages to get us up there, to get us really going. We're going to start our gravity turn nice and early. We do have quite a decent thrust to weight on the last half of this booster stage. So if we don't, we really need to start getting it leaned over here. At the same time, I don't want to go too far. It's not the most aerodynamically stable rocket that I've ever built, if I'm to be honest. So I guess before we actually get to it, I'm going to talk about the issues that I'm going to have igniting this upper stage. Well, it's actually the middle stage, but you know what I mean. It's the V2's engine was in reality ignited on the ground by the launch vehicle. They actually had no capability to ignite themselves, which means they can't light themselves in flight. There's an additional problem that you run into when you stage, when you separate from this one back here. What ends up happening is for a few seconds as you're separating, the aerodynamic forces on the front of the rocket are slowing it down rather than speeding it up, so you're actually under a negative acceleration, which means that all of the fuel that's sitting in this fuel tank floats up to the top because you're deaccelerating, and then there's no fuel down here to be pumped into the engine. You can get around this several ways. One method is to pressurize the tank so there's always pressure in every direction. The thing is, these tanks aren't pressurizable. They're basically just big hollow cylinders with fuel in them. And you can pressurize. A lot of modern rockets do that, but these rockets don't do that, so that's kind of a major issue that they run into, is the fact that you can't actually ignite them because all the fuel is going to be up in the top of the rocket, and you can't ignite them because there's nothing to actually ignite the rocket. They have no self-ignition system whatsoever. I'm going to get around that in a somewhat clever way. This is actually how some of the early rocket launches actually did do it. These solid rocket boosters right here, first off, they're going to separate me from the back stage, from this stage back here, so we don't crash into each other. Additionally, it's also going to push the rocket forward. It's going to keep me under a positive acceleration. These solid rocket boosters on their own have enough thrust to give this upper stage a positive acceleration, which should keep all the fuel pooled down at the bottom. Additionally, they're going to fill the entire nozzle area because I have them slightly leaned in. They're slightly aimed towards the center. It's just going to pack this entire area full of flame, which is hopefully going to be enough to ignite it. Kerbal Space Program actually doesn't keep track of crap like that, so I've actually gone into the mod files and modded this engine. So it does have one ignition. It does have one self-ignition, even though in reality the rocket engine actually didn't. Again, we're simulating it by the rocket exhaust of these igniting it, which in reality actually would work. It's just Kerbal Space Program doesn't actually keep track of the plumes in that way. So I had to mod it in, which is fine. It works. Oh god, the wobble is real. Sorry, I got an apogee of apogee of already 36 kilometers. That's decent. One thing you will absolutely notice is that these V2 clusters, they're not going to get me anywhere near as high as the single V2 on its own did, and that's because, well, it's a good way of wording this. It's heavy. There's a lot of extra weight on them. And while I do have 5 V2s, and you'd think, hey, 5 V2s, they can make it 5 times as far as one V2, right? Actually, no. If you take 5 V2s, duct tape them all together, and launch them all at the same time, you're actually going to cover the exact same distance you would with just one V2, because each V2 is carrying the weight of itself. So you're not actually going to get any extra distance at all. The thing is, you have to, basically, you're just adding the payload that all of these together carry. Because as you can see, I have no warhead on any of them. This V2 stage up here actually is the collective warhead of all 5 of these. And it's not the most efficient thing in the world, if I'm to be honest. Although we are not stable right now. Holy jeez. Yes, I just said holy jeez. I'm not very creative with my swearing right now, okay? So we're going to disable the flight controls. I'm going to do this manually. We're starting to get into the upper atmosphere, so the thrust vectoring is all I really have to control, which means I'm going to have to be pretty careful. We're going to have to start making our maneuvers way before I actually have to. And the relative lack of stability is pretty incredible. Yeah, again, this is not a stable rocket by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, I haven't had my Ferrum open this entire time, so we're approaching Mach 4. We're approaching Mach 4. Our apoapsis is of about 120 kilometers on burnout here. So we've managed to get nearly what we were able to get out of the single V2 in height, although we do not have the same speed. And we burnt out. So now we're going to go to orbit. We're going to give it to prograde. And we're then going to stage. And we're then going to, while at the positive acceleration, ignite that engine. Which again, we're simulating that the rocket exhaust from the solid boosters is what allowed it to ignite. And we're leaving our first stage goodbye. Goodbye, 5 V2s. I'm now down to just 1 V2. This poor little thing. And then when the solid rocket boosters burn out, we jettison them. Save the tiny bit of weight. And we're on our way. As you can see, the plume is really just expanded out there. As a result, my specific impulse is not going to be incredible. Something I did space when I was talking about in my first video how the V2 was such a terrible high altitude rocket. Actually, the early V2s were terrible high altitude rockets. The Germans did eventually figure out that the V2 would be spending the majority of its time accelerating in the upper atmosphere, and they actually did fit a larger expansion nozzle that actually did do a pretty decent job at the mid altitude range, which we're above, but you know, whatever. It's a start. It's better than nothing, okay? We have very little control. The thrust vectoring, the fins are doing nothing at this altitude, and the thrust vectoring is very slight, but we are high enough that we are going to jettison our capsule, and we're going to be activating the RCS on my maneuver capsule. And we're going to be using it to help out. And we kind of overdid it. We're going to go back to surface. And we're going to bring this up to, I believe, 20 degrees is a good start. We don't have a lot of control without the RCS. I'd also like to not bleed off all my RCS fuel. Just controlling my orientation. I'm going to need it to accelerate. The RCS uses the same thing as the main engines on my upper stage. So while this doesn't have the best thrust to weight ratio, so it's not accelerating terribly quick, it's decent, it's positive. We are going to get nearly 4,000 meters per second of acceleration out of this stage. We're already at 2,000, which is going to put us at around, that's going to put us at around 6,000 meters per second, and we need to get up to nearly 8. So we need to get nearly 3 kilometers per second. And luckily my upper stage is 3.6 kilometers per second. So yeah, it looks like we're actually going to make orbit with this. Although again, this stage is all that's actually going to be making it into orbit. This actually isn't. Also, we're going in the wrong direction. Whoops. Yeah, see what I mean? This thing just overdoes it like crazy. Yeah, this rocket is not the most agile. Yeah, we're going to turn this off and I'm going to manually get us close. This silly rocket. The more off prograde I am, the less we're actually going to be getting in acceleration, which is a little unfortunate. And the more I use my RCS, the more it gets wasted. We're going to go down to 10 degrees. I have no idea why it just randomly threw us up in the air like this. We're going to turn it back off again. Yep, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to manually do the RCS. The computer doesn't want to do it right. Alright, so we're going to get ourselves pretty much right on it. I'm going to let the computer run itself. And hopefully it should now, with just the thrust vectoring and a little bit of RCS, be able to maintain itself pretty much right on. Nope, and it immediately starts oscillating. Okay, so we're going to manually control it. Yeah, I don't trust this system anymore. Alright, getting back to our prograde. Controlling the attitude of a spacecraft is pretty difficult, I'm not gonna lie. I'm making it look terrible, but that's because it actually is really challenging. So, and also, we're almost up to 4 kilometers per second of acceleration. I was just going the wrong direction. Oh shit. Oh, penises. So remember when I said we were going to make it to around 4 kilometers per second with this stage? We're actually going to exceed that. We have 2,000 left. Oh, 6. Right, I said we're going to make it to 6 kilometers per second. We're actually not. We're actually not quite going to get 6 kilometers per second out of this. So I'm going to stop. I'm trying to look at the rocket itself, and I'm trying to look at the nav ball. I should just be looking at the nav ball. You guys can look at the rocket. It actually gets really confusing when you're trying to look at both at the same time. Let's see if we can roll ourselves level while we're at it. No, the answer is no, we can't actually control our roll right now. So while we aren't quite going to make the 6 kilometers per second I promised, I'm going to get close. 6, so I'm going to need 3 for my upper state. Yeah, this is going to be iffy. We might not actually make it into orbit even with the orbital maneuvering stage. Still, we're going to get close. We're also approaching 8 Gs of acceleration. I mean, this is some acceleration. And the second stage burnout, and boop, we're out of fuel. So we're going to extend U, activate my antenna before I forget, and we're going to stage, and we're going to use this, and we're going to go to prograde. I'm just going to leave it on prograde. And so we're leaving the sixth V2 behind. It's going to fall back into, basically we're not in orbit yet. You will notice something. I didn't actually spend that much time burning to get up. Getting up into the air isn't the challenging thing, and we're going to go to surface. And we're going to zero this out. We're going to burn towards the horizon rather than trying to burn towards prograde. Our apoapsis is plenty high. So, we're still not even close to in orbit, basically. We're at 6 kilometers per second. We need to be at least 8.7 what? I can't remember. I can't remember what orbital velocity is at 3 kilometers. But We could actually, it looks like we are going to be able to get this thing up to the what's it called? The International Space Station. It looks like we could actually intercept the International Space Station with this rocket. The downside being is the orbital maneuvering system that I'm now burning all the fuel of is supposed to be the payload. This itself is intended to be the payload, so I don't know why this engine... Feed pressure too low. Oh, I can only run so many engines at once. I'm carrying an extraneous engine. That's annoying. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11 of these 1 kilonewton thrusters going on. But yeah, as I said, this is my little baby orbital maneuvering stage. I use this on a lot of other craft. Usually, instead of an antenna, I have a little satellite mounted on the front. And usually it doesn't have to put itself into orbit. Usually it just is responsible for maneuvering around whatever it is that's already in orbit. Yeah. So yeah, the V-2 stage is really, it's not effective as an orbital delivery system. It really just isn't. We're actually going to go negative a little to try and arrest our vertical velocity. We're really not. Actually, you know what? No, we're going to coast to apoapsis instead. That's a much better idea. Yeah, that's a much better idea. Coasting to apoapsis rather than trying to herp-a-derp our way, rather than waste fuel, basically. So how long? We have a minute to burn time left. Time to apoapsis is 6 minutes. So we're going to disable our RCS so it doesn't get screwed up. And we're going to fast forward a touch. We're still losing electricity because by the that uses so much. We're going to wait till our time to apoapsis drops to about 30 seconds. Actually, are we going? Oh yeah, we're going to lose contact with our ground station soon. So never mind. We're going to finish our prograde burn right now. We're going to finish our prograde burn right now. Activate. Activate, please. There we go. And these thrusters, they don't have any throttles. That's the one issue they have, but they have a much better thrust to weight than the RCS thrusters themselves, which do have throttles. Which is why I personally like using them. Although, we're just going to burn prograde. We're going to kick our apoapsis up a bit. We're going to end up in a non-circular orbit, but I'd like to end up in orbit before we lose contact with the ground station. Actually, should have contact with that ground station by the time we reach our apoapsis. So we're going to shut off our engines again. This time we're going to disable our... We can't disable our... this probe core doesn't let that happen. Okay, so we have a negative electric charge balance, even if we had all our solar panels working. So this satellite's not even useful. Oh boy. I had to upgrade the probe core so I could use it to control the massive heavy... Oh hey, we have that place down there, so never mind, we don't... I made a silly mistake. Alright, so 30 seconds, that should be enough. Then prograde. And prograde, please. Okay, we can just use this one. Alright, and engines. And we did it, we made orbit. And okay, I shouldn't have said that yet. And orbit! We're in orbit! And the periapsis is high enough we're not gonna hit the atmosphere. We did it! We got something into orbit using V-2's, and it still has 1.5 kilometers per second of acceleration left, which is actually usable. It's actually usable! So the Germans could have, if they developed 1970s American whatever it's called, thrusters, they could have gotten some tiny little stuff into orbit. Not a lot, though. Again. This is not the most useful thing in the world. This is actually very useful if you can get it into orbit without burning up all of its own fuel, but I mean, hey, I got these solar panels and thrusters and this antenna and this battery and the probe core itself. I mean, this thing weighs like half a metric ton. Actually, how much does it weigh? It weighs 0.7 metric tons. I got 0.7 metric tons of crap into space using V-2's and an actually relatively modern satellite. But hey, I got 0.7 metric tons of crap into space. I consider this a success overall. It's not the best orbit I've ever been in, but it's an orbit. So again, I hope this has demonstrated that the difficulty in getting something into orbit isn't getting it up. Getting it up is relatively easy. That doesn't take that much. It's getting it into orbit. It's actually getting the horizontal velocity. Because again, orbital velocity, to have something in orbit, takes over 7 kilometers per second. It takes it actually takes more velocity the lower you are, but the higher you are, the more acceleration it takes to get to that altitude in the first place. So that was not the most optimum ascent angle. I could probably do a better job. I can probably get it up here with more fuel left over, but I'm calling this a success. And again, it's going to run itself out of fuel at some point. You know what, while we're here, while I have your attention, I am still recording, aren't I? Yep. So, we're going to intentionally deorbit it. Because I think things burning up on reentry is funny. And I mean, we're gonna give it a nice long burn. We want a nice steep, no chance of survival. No chance of survival at all. None. I also have a shitload of fuel left and I feel like using it. I mean, we have over 1 kilometer per second of fuel left. We're gonna go prograde now. We're gonna burn back towards orbit. I want to burn up most of my fuel. The lighter this is, the more of a chance it will actually survive re-entry. Do you think I can get myself back into orbit now? I bet I can. 1.5 kilometers per second is a decent amount. With that said, to get to geostationary orbit takes around 3.8 kilometers per second of acceleration. So I could not put this into a geostationary orbit. Getting to the moon takes about 3.6. So getting into geostationary orbit and getting something to pass the moon actually takes about the same amount of acceleration. They're just used in different ways. And I actually can. I can put myself back into orbit pretty easily. Yeah. Oh, you know what we should do? We're gonna turn back around. I love how many of these I have. A nice hard burn. Gonna get down to at least a negative kilometer. And boop. We're then going to disable all of our top engines. And we're then going to activate all of the bottom engines. Because I think it would be funny. And we're going to leave the RCS doing everything it can to stay flying in a straight line. Fire! Yeah, it didn't work. And this is the danger in using multiple engines. If the wrong ones flame out, this happens. No! Let's see if the RCS can get it under control. Whee! And you'll notice my center of mass is way down here. It's because of all the relatively heavy engines in the probe core on the bottom. Nothing on the top actually weighs all that much. And the answer to the question is yes, the RCS system can get itself under control using almost no fuel at all, to be honest. It's because the RCS thrusters are so far, the center of mass is down here. The RCS system's thrust is way up here. So it has a huge amount of leverage that the engines don't have because they're pushing relatively close to its center of mass. So the result is that you don't actually need to use all that much fuel with your RCS system if it's very far away from your center of mass to control your orientation. It's really cool. Yay! Although we are going to be turning it off and accelerating to the point where we're starting to hit the atmosphere, and then we're going to throttle up again. And then we're going to throttle up again. Oh, we're out of connection range. That's fine. There's nothing I need to activate anyway. So we're going to fast forward a bit. Try and get into the atmosphere quick enough that this doesn't take all day. And the center of mass is down here, the center of drag is probably up here, so it is going to come in engine first. That's actually a good thing because the engines are quite a lot tougher than the fuel tank that has absolutely no thermal insulation whatsoever. Was not designed to re-enter this thing. Although it's light enough that it could deaccelerate quick enough that it doesn't melt itself. Although that fuel tank, despite being protected by the engines, looks like it's trying really desperately to go. And if the drag of the engines is enough that it turns around backwards, it's absolutely going to blow up the fuel tank. And if we blow up the fuel tank, we're going to lose the majority of our drag because it is responsible for the largest chunk of surface area, which means we probably won't slow down fast enough to stop everything from melting. And things have started exploding. I'm not sure what that was. We get a nice slow motion because my frame rate shits itself. Those engines, they're doing a decent job of trying to protect it. I think that might have been one of the solar panels. Or one of my, actually it was probably one of the RCS thrusters. Oh, and more stuff is exploding. Quite a lot of heat. We're starting to get quite unstable. We're starting to get some serious deacceleration. We're exceeding 7 Gs of deacceleration. Also creating a crap ton of heat. We're approaching 9 Gs of deacceleration. We are approaching 10 Gs of deacceleration. And this is what I mean. If we don't get fast enough deacceleration, we're exceeding 15 Gs of deacceleration. We are now off the end of the scale. I don't know what we're doing. But yeah, if you don't deaccelerate, if you deaccelerate too quickly, obviously things get ripped apart. If you don't deaccelerate fast enough, you end up in a thicker atmosphere too quickly and the thing ripped apart. So because I've done such a steep descent, if you're trying to do a manned descent, obviously you're not going to descend this quickly. Because if you do, you're going to be killing people. Humans don't really deal with 15 Gs very well for extended periods of time, but we've done it. We survived re-entry. I was not expecting that. It's those engines. The fact that the engines are tough enough. I mean, if you think about it, the engines do have to deal with some insanely high heat as they're operating normally. So it does make sense that they'd be able to deal with the heat of re-entry. We lost our antenna. Oh, we lost the battery too. It was the battery and the antenna. It looks like the only two things we lost. We have all the RCS thrusters. We have the fuel tank. We have those. Yeah, we lost the battery and we lost the antenna. And that's it. That's all we lost. We made it. We re-entered. I thought that re-entry was going to be steep enough to definitely destroy things. It wasn't. As it turns out, those engines are tough as hell. And because the center of mass and the center of drag just happened to be lined up perfectly to keep the engines taking the majority of the heat, it made it. That's bizarre. I was not expecting that. I was honestly expecting more explosions. To the ground. So that was cool. We actually put something somewhat usable into orbit using V-2's. Although, as stated, we weren't even close to getting something to pass the moon. Squish, let alone getting, a giant colony set up on the moon. Let alone getting a human being to the moon. We're really not in the vague ballpark, to be honest. It would take several thousand of these trips to get enough crap into orbit. A lot of explosions, wow. But yeah, it's still exploding, huh? Okay, we're done. But yeah, it's really not practical to use that for a moon mission. So again, I'm going to be doing one more when I try to get an actual V2 upper stage into orbit, which is going to take quite a lot more. As I said, getting the engine itself into orbit, all the little engines that I took into orbit on this orbital maneuvering thing aren't very heavy, actually. They're actually pretty light. The major problem is dragging a V-2's engine into orbit. They're actually pretty heavy, so that's going to take a lot of extra fuel. As you saw, I mean, the majority of the acceleration was at the end there with that lightweight little thing. Getting that much acceleration with a heavy engine is much more difficult, so it's going to be a lot bigger and a lot stupider. So I hope I see you guys next time. I did it! Using 6 V-2's and as I said, an Apollo era technology, I was able to get over half a ton into orbit. It's better than nothing. Still definitely not a moon mission though. It's definitely not. It takes like 12,000 something metric tons of stuff into low Earth orbit to get a person to the moon and back. which is a lot more than half a ton. A lot more. Holy shit, it's a lot more. So I'll see you guys next time. Holy shit.